Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the presentation overview of the New York State OPWDD Integrated Supportive Housing Program. My name is Andre Reese, and I am joined by my colleagues Alex Brooks and Lynn Meiselwig. Today's presentation topics will include integrated supportive housing, also known as ISH, and the definition of ISH, OPWDD's involvement in ISH, provider roles and responsibilities, OPWDD application process options, which include subsidy only request for application, which is non-capital, and our capital request for application. Our low-income housing tax credits, capital funding transfers, OPWDD housing subsidies, and our Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative, also known as ESHI. What is supportive housing? Supportive housing is safe and affordable housing, which is a social determinant of health, meaning that it is a major factor in a person's ability to stay healthy, including accessing medical services and healthy foods. Supportive housing combines affordable housing assistance with wraparound supportive services for people with special needs and people experiencing homelessness. Residents of supportive housing contribute up to 30% of their income towards household expenses, which includes rent and utilities, and receive any supports they may need from a nonprofit service provider. What is OPWDD's involvement in ISH? There has been an increased demand for community-based integrated housing options for people served by OPWDD. Federal regulations such as HCBS, home and community-based settings, and Olmstead encouraged OPWDD to use more innovative and independent housing options. Since 2012, nearly 1,000 supportive housing units for people served by OPWDD have been funded. Almost 700 units statewide are currently open and operating. OPWDD formalized its involvement in supportive housing by establishing a partnership with New York State Homes and Community Renewal, also known as HCR, in 2012. This partnership allows OPWDD to prioritize which projects it will support to implement mechanisms for transferring funding to projects. OPWDD is now working with other state and municipal agencies such as New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, also known as OTDA, and the New York City Housing Preservation and Development to develop integrated supportive housing projects. I will now hand over the next segment of this presentation to my colleague, Lynn Meiselwig.
Okay, thank you, Andre. So in the next 4 slides, we will discuss some important roles and responsibilities expected from the support agency. Provider agencies play a crucial role with integrating and supporting people with developmental disabilities. So ultimately, so they can find and maintain affordable housing. It is the expectation of the provider to form and maintain a strong relationship with the developer from the initial concept and for the entire process. This is to ensure that the OPWDD units are adaptable and accessible for people with varying abilities and needs. How would we do that? Perhaps widening doorways, adjusting countertop heights, creating wide enough spaces in bathrooms and kitchens so that people with mobility aids can maneuver better in their homes. Providers could also suggest adding vision and hearing and sensory accommodations, such as adjusting lighting and sounds and vibrations for egress. Some common areas within the building should be fully accessible, perhaps requiring an obstacle-free environment equipped with elevators and ramps. And it is also the responsibility of the provider and the developer to ensure that there is access to all public paths and surrounding streets streets so people can access the community. A few enhancements could give anybody a chance to age in place in the place that they want to live. While working closely with your local developmental disabilities regional office, or DDRO, it is also the responsibility of the provider to actively recruit and retain tenancy, as well as filling future vacancies with an established waitlist. When the ISH project is approved and close to completion, this is in approximately 3 to 4 months prior to the closing, the provider will participate in routine rent-up meetings. During these meetings, the provider, the developer, the local DDRO, and central office will discuss proposed tenants, and we will discuss support services the person might need to live independently and how the agency will support them. Can the person sustain the unit financially? We would need to look at proof of income. How can the person be assisted with their mobility needs? What barriers could be removed to ensure success? How will the agency go about mitigating these barriers? For example, a person occasionally forgets to take their medications, perhaps adding a smart device. It will help to ensure that medications are administered properly. The provider should assist with collecting and reviewing documents required for the housing subsidy program, such as tenancy rights, income, the QA expectations checklist. These items will be discussed during these meetings. OPWDD has the right of first refusal with each proposed tenant. People in emergency need of housing will always take a priority. These meetings will continue until a wait list has been established. Once the ISH projects are opened, it is the role and responsibility of the provider to ensure that the tenants are successful. There is an expectation that the policies and procedures are put in place so that the agency can do the following: to ensure that the rent is being paid, to prevent or resolve tenancy issues. How do these people access these supports? Is there a defined place for OPWDD tenants to go for support? We have found in previous rounds that an office on site provides a nice safe place for our tenants to go when they need support. This office could have regular, reliable office hours, but also provide a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week phone contact in case there's an emergency. It is also important that the provider work closely with the local DDRO. It is important that the provider alerts the DDRO of any changes. This would include income, hospitalization, whether or not the person is still in their home. It is important for the provider to assist with recertifications, maintaining a passing housing subsidy program checklist, securing tenancy rights, which would be looking at the lease, and to make recommendations for vacant units. Final slide for provider roles and responsibilities. The ISH units are expected to be non-certified housing environments. However, waiver services, including Medicaid services, these would include community hab or day hab or employment, are all optional services and they are separate from housing. It is up to the person to decide what, if any, services they want or they want to take. Tenancy cannot be impacted should a person choose to self-direct their services. The support agency is expected to provide housing-related supports to OPWDD tenants, even if the person is self-directing and when those services are provided from different agencies. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the housing subsidy agency to work directly with the ISH project to ensure that the housing supports remain in place for the tenants. The support services cannot exceed the individual's authorized service amount to live in an uncertified service setting. Please refer to the Housing Services Agreement for additional guidance regarding the roles and responsibilities that providers might have in an ISH project. In order to be eligible for ISH, The applicants must ensure that all the prospective, not the applicant, the provider must ensure that all prospective tenants must meet all tenancy requirements, which is identified in our administrative memorandum, the ADM 2023-02. In a nutshell, aside from having established eligibility for OPWDD services, the tenant must be 18 years old or older in order to be able to execute a lease. They must have expressed interest in living independently in a non-certified setting. They must meet the income requirements established by the project. This is based on the county in which the ISH project is located in. Please refer to the ADM for further eligibility requirements. Senior housing. So for senior housing, there are two classifications for senior housing with an age requirement for both. Projects can either be for people age 55 and older or 62 and older. The first group, for the 55 years and older, these projects must have at least 80% of the units rented to people who meet the age requirement of being 55 years old or older. Whereas in the senior housing for the folks 62 and older, all the units must be filled with folks that are 62 years and older. For either project, the maximum number of OPWDD units is limited to 25% of the total units. Finally, for senior housing, ISH applicants who intend to participate in senior housing must be prepared to outline the following in their application. First, the status of local approvals of public support and how it aligns with the proposed age limits. These age limits are often included in the local applications and public hearings. The application must demonstrate the intention to include OPWDD units into the project with tenants who may not be seniors. Secondly, even though the age level of referral can be lower in the 55-year-old category, the agency must provide all relevant information to the DDRO regarding the level of demand for that age category being proposed. Finally, the agency must include information on the application status for age waivers, such as from the Division of Human Rights. These waivers must clearly identify the OPWDD units and any age restrictions for those people approved by OPWDD. How will you identify age-appropriate potential tenants for the OPWDD units? How will you address tenancy issues? These are all important roles for providers and ISH projects.
Thank you so much to Andre and Lynn for covering the initial portions of this presentation. Once again, my name is Alex Brooks. I serve as the coordinator of supportive housing here at OPWDD. And now I will cover some of the application requirements for the integrated supportive housing program. So as Andre mentioned on prior slide, there are two application paths for the ISH program. Project teams can request subsidy only or no capital awards for their projects, in which OPWDD would provide the housing subsidy to cover the rental expenses for the ISH units. The other path would be for the capital funding for a project. So for projects that need funding to assist with the development and ongoing operations of their projects, you would go on the capital path. The capital path also includes allocations for housing subsidies to support the ISH units. It's important to note for any providers interested in submitting ISH applications in the funding round, you may only submit one project per OPWDD regional office catchment per year. So for example, if you are located in Region 1 and you have a project in Buffalo and a project in Rochester, you could only submit one project per year. However, if, for example, you had a project in Queens, Region 4, and another project in Suffolk County, Region 5, and your agency had approval to provide services within both counties, then you could submit projects for both areas within the same year. The integrated supportive housing application is broken down into 4 distinct sections, and we'll describe them below and how many points are associated with each. The first section, which is worth 35 points, relates to applicant experience. In this, we're reviewing the overall experience of the OPWDD provider, particularly their experience as it relates to non-certified housing. We're looking for, do you have authority to operate the housing subsidy program and or the self-direction program? And do you have experience with not only assisting people with accessing housing in the community, but also maintaining their housing in the community? We'll also be looking at the experience of the developer that is involved in the project. Do they have experience with operating affordable and supportive housing projects? And do those projects have a good track record? Do they have a successful experience with applying for and receiving public funding? So in this section, we'll be reviewing those aspects of the project. Section 2 relates to project features. This covers 30 points of the application. We'll be reviewing the overall location of the project. Is it located in an area that's accessible to public transportation? Is it a walkable neighborhood? Are there sidewalks? Are there safe points of access to cross busy streets? Does it provide a person with easy access to their community if they don't have access to a vehicle and other modes of transportation? Can they get to places where they may be able to apply for a job or go grocery shopping or access faith-based centers or other religious centers? Can they access the greater community around them? So that's what we're looking overall in the project location itself. We'll also look at the unit design. Are the OPWDD units designed no differently than any other affordable unit within the project? In the past, we've received proposals for OPWDD units that are designed as efficiency apartments, where they have shared kitchen and bathroom spaces. We will not allow for that. We expect the units to be fully one-bedroom apartments. We'll also allow for studio apartments in the New York City area, just due to the density of space. However, these units should look no different than any other studio or one-bedroom apartment within the project. We'll look at the overall unit count. Are the units at or below 25% of the total project? We'll also look for the distribution of units. Are the units integrated throughout the project, or are they set aside in one certain wing where all the supportive housing units are? We would want them to be integrated. We require them to be integrated. Anything else other than that, we will not allow for. Additionally, we'll also look for the rental payment guidelines and how the agency will operate transmitting the rental subsidy. Section 3 pertains to the budget, which is worth 10 points. In this section, we'll review the OPWDD rent amounts. Are they within an affordable level that the OPWDD housing subsidy can support? And are they set at the same amount as other rent amounts within a similar income band? Also, we'll review the OPWDD requested amount of capital for the project, which we'll discuss the exact calculations for later in this presentation. But in this section, we'll review just to make sure it meets our requirements. And the final section, section 4, is the service provided, integration, and individual choice. So in this section, we'll discuss some of the areas or review some of the areas that Lynn discussed in her slides, such as is the provider attesting that any waiver services will be separate from housing services and people's tenancy won't be affected? Do they have an office space on site and are ready to provide services as needed? And are they adhering to any sort of state and federal guidelines that pertain to developmental disability services? So the overall, we'll discuss now the overall capital application process. So what should be in place before you submit an ISH application? It is expected that the OPWDD provider is matched with an experienced affordable housing developer. We have had some providers who have taken the development aspect into their own hands and have developed real estate teams in order to develop their own housing. However, we recommend that if it is your first foray into supportive housing, you match with a developer or consultant who has a lot of experience in this area. We expect the OPWDD provider applying for ISH funding to have experience with the OPWDD housing subsidy program. One of the major pieces is to be able to transmit that subsidy for any ISH eligible tenants, so you should have authority to operate that program. The project should be very close to being shovel ready. When we say shovel ready, we mean ready to close on construction financing within 1 year of an ISH award. We realize that there are other factors which may delay this process. However, when it comes time to submit the application, the applicant should have everything in place to go as soon as possible. The project team should have contacted and received feedback from all their potential funding sources, whether that's New York State Homes and Community Renewal or any of their sister agencies, any other state or municipal agency that are providing funding, or if they're working with some private corporations such as banks, receive feedback from them as well. The project should also receive or have a plan to receive all of their local necessary approvals within 1 year of an issue award. So if there's any sort of zoning clearances, if there needs to be a presentation in front of a local community board, if there's any variances that are needed, those should either be in place or the agency should have a distinct plan to obtain them within 1 year of receiving an issue award. As I mentioned 2 slides ago, we have a formalized application process. The application is available on OPWDD's website for applicants to review, even when we are on off cycles for application periods. We typically release 1 application per state fiscal year in order for applicants to apply for capital funding. A distinct requirement of the application process is that each applicant must have a technical assistance call with OPWDD's central office and the regional office that the project is located in before an application is submitted. If you fail to request a technical assistance call, or if an application is submitted before a technical assistance call is completed, then the application would be denied from funding. We find these technical assistance calls are incredibly beneficial to clearing up any potential issues before a formal application is submitted. It is important to note that the OPWDD provider is the one who will submit the application. Ultimately, it is who we are assessing overall for their worthiness to participate in the project. So the application should not be from the words of a developer or consultant in the project. It should come from the provider. Providers, as I mentioned, will be assessed on their experience with providing services, particularly in non-certified and independent housing environments. Also part of our application process are due diligence checks. These are to ensure that the applicants are fiscally and programmatically healthy in various areas of OPWDD. So included in the due diligence checks are checking with DQI to see if there's any sort of programmatic red flags or if the agency either is on or is in danger of being on the early alert list. We'll check the agency's consolidated fiscal reports to ensure they're in a healthy capital position. We'll check with OPWDD's Office of Audit Services to make sure that the agency has had clean reviews. And additionally, we'll use GIS programming to do geomapping of the proposed project site to ensure that there's no heightened scrutiny concerns under the HCBS program. So overall, the application allows us to learn about greater detail about the project scope, costs, number of people supported, and community-based features. So the majority of applicants that are applying for ISH funding will have an application that links with one of the low-income housing tax credit programs across the state. We'll discuss tax credits in a little more detail and later in this presentation, but we'll just cover some of the information here. So it's important to note for any applicants intending on applying for funding through New York State HCR or the Housing Finance Agency, which is one of their sister agencies below them. If you are proposing a project that includes units for people with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities, and you do not have a letter of support from OPWDD, your project will be removed from their consideration for financing. It is required to have a letter of support from OPWDD before moving forward with HCR and HFA with IDD units. And OPWDD will only provide letters of support to the projects it intends on funding in open application rounds. And we'll quickly switch over to the non-capital application process. As I mentioned, these are for projects that don't require capital funding and only need long-term commitments of housing subsidies. So even if a project does not require capital funding and is only seeking housing subsidies, it still must apply through the integrated supportive housing process. This doesn't only include large multifamily buildings, which would be typically linked with capital applications, but also smaller arrangements such as 4 to 8 unit apartment buildings. For the non-capital application process, we expect that all of our expectations will be met and all requirements will be met before issuing a support letter. This may impact the availability of housing subsidies for people who elect to live in the apartments. Similar to the capital application process, we'll only accept proposals for shovel-ready projects that are ready to move forward with housing subsidies. The providers will submit an application that's very similar to the capital application. There'll be some minor differences, such as in terms of the budget. We won't be reviewing the capital ask or any of those portions. But in terms of reviewing the experience, the project location, integration, things of that sort, it'll all be the same requirements. And as I mentioned before, HCR will look for a letter of support, but also other state funding agencies will look for a letter of support from OPWDD if a project includes IDD units. Okay, so similar here, if you are applying for tax credit financing through government agencies, you will be required to follow the OPWDD capital or non-capital application process. All right, now we'll just do a quick transition to discuss the low-income housing tax credits. This is a program established in the 1970s by the Internal Revenue Service, or the IRS, as a way to incentivize the development of affordable housing across the United States. It is the way 90% of affordable housing gets constructed in the US. And overall is a great and very beneficial program for supporting the development of much needed housing across the United States. The way the program works is the IRS awards housing tax credits to state housing agencies across the US. For New York, that would be HCR and HFA. These tax credits provide a dollar-for-dollar reduction for federal tax income liabilities for larger corporations. So the way they work are the housing agencies award tax credits to the developers. Developers that are awarded tax credits are able to sell them on the open market in order to raise equity in their projects. And these credits are purchased, as I mentioned, by banks and other large corporations to reduce their federal tax liability and also assist them with meeting their federal obligations under the Community Reinvestment Act. At this time for capital projects, we require that projects have to receive low-income housing tax credits. This is due to the way our funding currently works and the way our appropriations are allowed. So if your project has another method of financing, we ask that you reach out to us in order to discuss other ways to be able to support a project. But at this time for capital projects, you must have tax credits linked to your project. So if you don't have tax credits at this time, as I mentioned, please contact us, but it may be possible that you may only be able to receive housing subsidies to support your project. Right. So for more information on the tax credit program, we encourage you to visit HCR's websites for their application process and things of that sorts. However, we can cover some of the basic information they expect here. Similar to OPWDD, HCR has limited amount of capital to award to projects across the state. So they expect applicants to be able to leverage alternate sources of funding in order to support the construction and operation of their projects. There are two separate paths for tax credits that HCR and HFA offer. The first and most popular option being the multifamily finance 9% option. This is a very highly competitive program that provides access to what are known as 9% low-income housing tax credits that can fund up to 90% of a project's overall cost for up to a 10-year period. The 9% RFP has very strict application deadlines. It's only open usually once or twice per year. It has very distinct requirements in terms of the way projects are designed. If you're interested in this route, we ask that you reach out to HCR and schedule a consultation session with them. The other option for tax credits is the 4% low-income housing tax credit standalone application. This awards a much smaller percentage, so only up to 40% of a project's total costs. However, they are much more flexible in terms of the way projects can be designed and financed. Applications are also accepted on a year-round rolling basis. So as soon as the state fiscal year opens, they'll accept applications until funding runs out. And as long as a project meets their minimum requirements and appears to be fundable, then it stands a very good chance of being financed under the 4% program. 4% projects are normally much larger in scale, so we're talking normally over 100 units, and also feature a larger amount of funding glommed together. So not only 4% tax credits and OPWDD capital, but also capital funding from other state agencies or from private lenders. All right. So including tax credit programs from HCR and HFA, there also may be tax credit programs from municipal agencies, the largest being New York City's Department of Housing Preservation and Development. They have a variety of housing finance programs. If you are within the 5 boroughs, we encourage you to reach out to HPD to learn more about their financing programs. There are also government-sponsored banks, such as the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York, which operates in New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. They provide financing to affordable housing projects. Some state agencies, such as New York State OTDA, offers capital funding, such as the Homeless Housing and Assistance Program, which targets housing that assists people who qualify as homeless. And there are also private lenders and investors that specify working in affordable housing, such as the Community Preservation Corporation. All right, so now we'll discuss how exactly OPWDD funding works in projects and how the funding makes its way into the projects ultimately. So OPWDD will only fund up to 50% of the development costs for OPWDD units. So as an example, if it costs $100,000 per unit to develop a project, and OPWDD will fund 50% or $50,000 of each unit that is set aside for a person with a developmental disability. In overall projects, only 25% of the units can have receive preferential tenancy for a person with intellectual and or developmental disabilities. When we say preferential tenancy, we mean the units are specifically set aside for a person with an IDD. They aren't subject to any of the lottery requirements that are typical with affordable housing units, and they remain in regulation for at least a 30-year period where they have to be set aside for a person who qualifies for the units. Very often we are approached with projects that would like to include other populations, such as people with serious mental illness, veterans, frail and elderly seniors. We do allow for projects to have multiple populations. However, there are some additional restrictions in terms of Medicaid rulings and such. So if you are looking to include another project, please reach out to OPWDD either on a TA call or when we're not holding an application period for us to talk you through the project on what is and isn't allowed. So capital funding can only be transferred to the project during the permanent finance closing. During the affordable housing process, once the project receives all of its necessary funding, there are 2 distinct real estate closings. The first being the construction closing, which would be the closing on all the funding necessary to construct the project, and then the permanent finance closing, which would be the overall long-term mortgage of the project. OPWDD will only transfer funding during the permanent finance closing. So once the project has been open and operating for several months and has obtained at least a 90%, 97% occupancy rate for at least 3 months. That's only when, and also once we can affirm that all of the integrated supportive housing units have been rented by someone who is eligible for OPWDD supports and services. That is only when OPWDD will transfer funding over. However, we're still a party to the construction closing. We will have a whole host of closing documents, which will need to be reviewed, agreed upon, and executed at the time of the closing. If you would like samples of those documents, please reach out to our office and we'd be happy to provide you with copies. Additionally, on our website, we have a term sheet which goes into a little more detail about how exactly our funding works and more rules and regulations about its usage. Appropriations, application cycles, calculations, things of that sort. So if you go to OPWDD's website, which will be linked at the end of this presentation, or reach out to our office, we'd be happy to provide that for you. Pardon me. Now switching over to rents for the integrated supportive housing units. So as Lynn mentioned, all agencies participating in the ISH program must follow the rules and requirements of OPWDD's housing subsidy program that are listed under the relevant ADM. Rents for the ISH units must be set at 50% of the area median income of the county that the project is located in. So not the average, the middle number, the median. If you need some more familiarity in what the AMI levels are for your county, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development keeps a fairly up-to-date list of each county of New York State. Additionally, HCR has that information located on their website as well. Tenants in the ISH units are responsible to contribute 30% of their countable income towards housing expenses, such as rent and utilities. However, this amount may change depending upon their level of income. Regardless of the development source, so whether you're using a tax credit program or if you went the non-capital route and have a non-traditional funding source, the apartment rents must not exceed the maximum payable amount for OPWDD's housing subsidy program. As we know, many of the affordable housing projects will implement rent increases into their project in order to account for differences in cost of living and things of that sort. We require that any rent increases to the ISH units must be formally approved by our office. So if you're currently operating an ISH project and you are coming up on the period where you want to request a rent increase, reach out to your local regional office with information on the current rent level and what the new proposed rent level will be, and they will forward it to central office for review and approval. It is important to note that OPWDD will only approve rent increases that occur during periods of lease renewal or new lease signings. So now, to close out our presentation, we're going to discuss the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative, also known as ESHI. This was a program developed in 2016 in order to assist with combating large-scale homelessness around New York State. The program was funded using funds from a lawsuit from New York State against JP Morgan Chase in 2008 due to their practices in the mortgage crisis around that time. New York State chose to reinvest that $2.6 billion of that funding into the ESHI program in order to build and support 6,000 new permanent supportive housing units across New York State. The first 5-year cycle ended in 2021, and the New York State Legislature made the decision to reappropriate funding into the program in order to support it in future years. This program supports a variety of target populations across New York State and involves a whole host of New York State agencies, I believe 9 of them to be exact. Including people with IDD, it's also people with serious mental illness, people that maybe experience substance use disorder, victims of domestic violence, frail and elderly seniors, veterans, people experiencing chronic homelessness, people with HIV and/or AIDS, and things of that sort. So for a whole host of people with special needs across New York State. However, with the qualifier being that they need to qualify as homeless. So the ESHI program, the funding is a little bit different than ISH. While ISH has capital funding, ESHI is funding specifically for service and operating. So when we say services, we mean funding for any staffing, equipment, office space, or other facets necessary for the service provision related to the target population. It's important to note that if any services that are covered by another funding source, such as Medicaid, cannot be requested under ESHI funding. So things such that may be covered under ComHab or other waiver services can't be requested under ESHI funding. The other portion of ESHI funding pertains to operating, so rental subsidies. So since OPWDD's rental subsidies are state paid, for ESHI, they would be paid under the ESHI grant and can still be requested. For the ESHI program, applicants in their application can request up to $25,000 per person for a 5-year cycle. So yeah, ESHI contracts are run for 5 years. Assuming the program is healthy and runs well, it can be reappropriated for another 5-year cycle. All right, So as I mentioned 2 slides ago, the largest qualifier for ESHI is that a person must be defined as homeless. OPWDD was not an ESHI in the first year of the program in 2016. However, we were added in 2017 and were allowed to expand upon the definition of homelessness. This was due to 2 distinct reasons. The first being OPWDD does not have the same rates of pervasive homelessness as some of the other New York State agencies such as OMH and OASIS. Additionally, a large portion of the ESHI application pertains to need for homeless housing within an area. For the majority of other populations within the ESHI program that are served, the need can be tracked using a HUD program called Continuum of Care. People with IDD currently are not tracked by a continuum of care, so therefore OPWDD needs to find alternate data in order to document the source of need for people that qualify as homeless. So we were allowed to expand the definition in order to better support our population. So not only including people that may be under the traditional definition of homeless, such as people residing in shelters, on the streets, or any other sort of method of being unstably housed, we're able to include people transitioning from institutional settings, such as residential schools, intermediate care facilities, prisons, hospitals, that do not have an alternate place to live. And also people at imminent risk of homelessness due to potential loss of caregiver. As we know, we have a large portion of our population that may be residing at home with family or another caregiver, and may be reaching an age that they may not be able to provide the level of need that the person requires. So we would consider these people at imminent risk of homelessness. An important note to make, if you are looking to include the IDD population in your ESHI application, you need an OPWDD letter of support. If you do not have a letter of support with your application, it may be disconsidered from funding. So please reach out to your OPWDD regional office if you are interested in the ESHI program to discuss your proposed project, discuss the need for homeless housing within the area of the project, and to request a letter of support. So the ESHI program is released, the ESHI RFP, pardon me, is released annually each year by the New York State Office of Mental Health. They are the lead procurement agency on the project and take the overall steps to release the RFP each year. It is released each year on the Grants Gateway website. Being registered for Grants Gateway is a requirement in order to apply for ESHI. So if you aren't currently registered within the Grants Gateway website, please take the steps to go ahead and do that. It does take some time and there are numerous forms that need to be submitted. So we recommend that you do that right away if you are interested in ESHI. The ESHI RFP is normally released typically between the mid to late summer or in early fall. And prior versions of the ESHI RFP are available on OMH's websites. If your agency does receive an ESHI award, it's important to note that this is only a conditional award. This conditional award is good for a 24-month or 2-year period and will only be executed once you've received all your necessary capital funding for your project. So for example, you receive an award and you apply for OPWDD capital funding through the ISH program. You apply for tax credit financing through HCR's 9% program and any other necessary gap funding you may need. You have 100% of your capital financing. Your ESHI award would go from conditional to executed. Okay. So if you are interested in learning more about non-ESHI projects or just regular integrated supportive housing projects, please either reach out to us here at OPWDD's Office of Home and Community Living and Central Office. We'll include our contact information on the final slide, or to the regional office where your project will be located. We're always more than happy to do technical assistance and talk through projects, both during application cycles and during off cycles. If you are interested in learning more about ESHI projects, we ask that you review the RFP. As I mentioned before, they're available on OMH's websites here at the following link. So here is our contact information. We are available by phone and by email. We hope to hear from you in order to learn more about your projects and to discuss supportive housing. housing, as it is a program we're very excited about and really want to grow across the state. I'd like to take this time to thank my colleagues Andre Reese and Lynn Meiselwick for assisting me with this presentation, and we thank you for listening in today.